Here we go. Let's get started. Good afternoon and happy Thursday, everybody. You are tuned into the Backstage webinar. If you've just joined us and you're wondering what in the world have I stumbled upon, rest assured this is not another leadership webinar or podcast. Lord knows we are inundated with all the things to do during this season. Here at Resilient Church Leadership, we launched this Backstage as just a platform to pause and to reorient ourselves back to the things that matter, to check in with ourselves. How are we doing? How are we feeling as leaders in terms of soul care? So that is what you have tuned in here with, and we are so glad to have you. My name is Eddie Copeland. I am the Executive Director of Church United here in South Florida with the National Christian Foundation, where I lead a gospel city movement. We have just seen tremendous growth and impact as we invest into leaders' lives below the waterline. And I'm joined with three good friends here. Start with to my left, at least on my screen, is Dr. Margaret Diddams. She's the former provost of Wheaton College and an organizational psychologist. We have Eric Brown, who is or what was a pastor for many years and now serves at DePaul and is also a counselor. And my good friend Justin Moxley, who helps lead Stadia, a global church planting organization. This week, we are going to follow up. This is just part 2 on a 6-month check-in in terms of where are we as leaders, as pastors, as ministry leaders with just this whole COVID pivot that we've all had to make. And today we're going to focus on teams. How are we thinking about our teams? How are we leading our teams? Here's some things that we've just seen. We're going to talk about some trends that we've seen in terms of dealing with pastors day in and day out, dealing with ministry leaders, and hopefully you can leave here just a little bit more refreshed and reoriented. So with that as our frame, we're going to go ahead and jump right into our discussion. And Justin, I'm actually going to start with you, if that's okay. I heard a pastor share with me this week that as he looks back at this just whole pandemic season in terms of leading his team and his leadership in general, he started with, listen, my team knows how to play football. We were pretty good at playing football. We weren't in the NFL, but you know what? We knew the rules of the game. We were pretty decent at it. Pandemic hit. We pivoted. We started to play lacrosse. We didn't really know a whole lot about lacrosse, but we learned the rules. We started to build a new team to move some people around, and we started to play some lacrosse. Now, as we go back into this phygital world where a lot of our churches are reopening and we're doing the social distant thing and all of that, but still have this digital kind of press in that we're all doing. Now we're playing water polo, and I'm getting water splashed in my face, and I know nothing about water polo. My team knows nothing about water polo, and they're exhausted. I'm exhausted. I don't really know how to pivot again. Is that a fair sentiment? Is that what you're hearing? And if so, talk to us about that.
Yeah, I've heard many different pictures of what that looked like. I've heard one that's we were running a marathon, and then we realized there was a triathlon on the second leg, and now we've got another leg that's coming up. At Stadia, we work with church planners all over the globe, and predominantly within the U.S., a number of them. And it's a hard time. It's a hard season to know where to focus our energy. We need to know how to manage our energy, and even how we're dealing with all of the things that continue to come at us. And one of the things that I've heard recently is, if we were just beginning to hit maybe a little bit of a stride, but then we're trying to figure out now how we deal with our children at home. We work with so many young pastors. My gosh, there is so much that's coming at folks. And what we continually tell them is, hey, you need to give yourself a little grace here. The church in North America has existed in kind of a physical form over the last 400 years. It's going to take us just a little bit of time to figure out how we navigate a phygital world where we do both analog, digital, physical, digital throughout both of those. It's we just keep saying, and you just got to give yourself a little grace here in that. You got to take it step by step in the ways that you kind of approach stuff.
One of the things, and I'd love to hear from you, if you're here on Zoom with us or you're watching on Facebook Live, would you put in the comments, what is just the dumbest piece of advice you have heard as a ministry leader, as a pastor during this season? Because
and please don't use my name if it was just what I said just a second ago.
Actually, please use Justin's name if it was him that said it, so we can shame him. But no, but seriously, I've watched so many webinars, listen to podcasts, my board sending me stuff, other pastors are sending me stuff. This is helpful. Be sure to check this out. And about I don't know, 8 weeks into this thing, I just shut it all. Like, I can't take any more content because it's starting to like not even make any sense to me. I'm exhausted. I don't need any more content. And I just heard so much dumb advice. And I think for me, if I could just be vulnerable, was just the over spiritualization that was the pandemic. Like, well, hey, listen, we all got to lean in. Like, what's God really showing you? Like, what's God showing you for your team and all this? And not that he wasn't doing that, but it got to a point where, like, listen, like, you're not in touch with, like, I'm lost here. I'm tired. My family is pivoting. Like, my whole world has changed drastically. And yes, I believe that God is in that. And yes, I know he's going to be faithful to that. But would you please stop over spiritualizing this for
I
me?
heard one guy say, I wish that God right now would just speak to me on how to do fifth grade math. That's what I
Right.
really need help with. Like, you're
And that's
trying
the
to
honest
help your
truth.
kids.
Yeah. From Facebook here, a viewer said there is no pandemic. Oh, I've heard that. Oh, I've definitely heard that. Yeah, this is all a pandemic. But it's just ridiculous. We need some psychology help. Margaret, Eric, talk to us.
Well, one thing, just Justin, Eddie, as you're talking with pastors, and what is God teaching me in this? We want quick answers, and for us to expect God to be, we don't know God's lesson. It may be 6 months, a year, etc., and it may not be what we expect. So I would hope that people are not looking for those quick answers, because there's definitely, God is sovereign in this, but to expect something now, and that over spiritualization is just not realistic. I would say also around that. Eric.
Yeah. What I keep saying to myself, I'm saying to my clients, my friends who are pastors as well. I said it back in March, and I keep saying it. We know we won't be the same, at the end of this, right? The question is, who do we want to be? Who do we feel God is calling us to be? Because this is one of those unique moments, in life. And we know we're going to change. We just don't know what all those changes are going to entail, right? But we do have a vision of who God wants us to be.
It's good. One of the things that I think that Eric, you and I were speaking earlier about this, is we've learned about trust. We've had to learn to trust our teams, and we've also learned a lot about our teams. We've learned who's not so good at this role, who's really shown and like strengthened in another role. But in general, I think a lot we had a guest a few weeks ago here on the backstage that said every senior pastor has a little bit of a tyrannical bone in them, and like there's this deep suspicion that like you're not really working. And I think early on, but I think that was more true. But I think now we're learning to trust our people, to trust our team. Eric, could you just share a little bit of just the role trust plays as we think about our team?
Yeah, so trust is one of my research specialties, and I'll say a little bit, then I want to hand it over to Margaret, because she's the IO Psych person. One thing that I'm telling pastors is they really need to get a copy of Andy Crouch's little book, Strong and Weak. He has this quadrilateral, and I think we might have it. We might be able to put it up there. But he talks about the importance of both authority and vulnerability, right? And so, we have it right here. So we have going vertically, this authority axis, and then horizontally, vulnerability. And the reality is, with COVID going on, we're all being pushed more toward feeling vulnerable, right? We're all feeling a sense of our weakness, but some of us don't like that, okay? And so we draw away from vulnerability, right? And then we end up in this third and this fourth quadrant. We either withdraw or we exploit, right? And when it comes to trust, what is trust? I mean, trust is simply the willingness to be vulnerable with another person, okay? And so I'll turn it over to Margaret, but we know one key component of a healthy team is a team where the senior leaders honestly have to model this position of being both vulnerable with their authority.
That's good. And by the way, all the resources that we're going to share on screen and talk about will be at our website at resilientchurchleadership.com for you to view and download. And we even have a team assessment that you can share, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Margaret, can you talk with us a little bit by way of follow up on what Eric shared, is how has the pandemic changed the way that we relate to one another as a team?
Yeah, so think about those first days in March, April. We're pivoting. We're trying to figure out what to do. As Justin was saying, we're changing sports. Well, let's follow that metaphor a little bit farther. When we know baseball or football, we know our position and we're good at it. When we made this pivot in April, we had to pick up a new sport and a new position, and we didn't know how to play it, nor did we know how to work together. So it was just kind of in a sense, for a lot of organizations, it was just a pile on to get through. I'm going to continue with the sports metaphors. So what people probably saw in April was this kind of all hands on deck. We just need to get things done. And the typical roles and responsibilities in organizations just kind of got thrown out because everyone was doing everything. Well, now that we're 6 months in, some of that everyone doing everything has been normalized. It's been normalized, but it hasn't been articulated.
That's good.
So what's happening is people are kind of tripping on each other, not out of meanness or power plays or anything else, but there's new roles and they haven't been defined. And so we've had this kind of 6 months of not being as effective and efficient. This is Justin's what you were talking about earlier about having to do these shifts. And so I think at the 6 months, what becomes really important is to step back and say, okay, we're in this new normal. And we're pivoting again between this virtual and physical. We really need to have trusting conversations, those constructive conversations of how each person's roles and work together in team. How are we doing?
Margaret, can I throw that's probably even true of the home team, my family. It's probably my work team and even kind of my social team of trying to navigate all of those. Man, I'd love to keep talking about that, man. I think that's right on.
Yeah. So so I do psychology in organizations. Eric does more of family, interpersonal, etc. But I steal a lot from his area. And so one of the things we want to think about in organizational life, in a team, let's say you have 4 or 5 people, let's say you have 5 people on your team, there's really 6 people there. And what we like to say is it's the 5 people and the team. And so you have the health, the flourishing of each person, but then there's also the flourishing of the team. And leaders have to be paying attention to that team as well as the health of each person there. So one of the ways to think about that teaming, so how are you teaming? Right. So what is the processes and the roles and relationships and communications that's happening? And Eric touched on this, Eddie talked about it. The foundation of a healthy team is trust. That is the glue. That is what makes a team a team. There's more of that, but it has to be the foundation of trust. So what's happening in trust right now, when everyone is doing kind of everyone else's work, you have to take time to step back and say, how is it that we are working together intentionally? Because we've just been stumbling over each other. And so I like to talk about this as constructive conversations. Let's talk about the team. Let's talk about that 6th member that's in the room with us and take it out of the defensiveness, because what I like to say is when you are doing a teamwork, you can negotiate now or manage conflict later.
Yeah.
Negotiate now or manage conflict later. And what happened is we didn't have time in March and April to negotiate.
Yeah.
So what's happened is there's been this conflict, and at different organizations, it's at a different temperature.
Conflict? What are you talking about? That's so foreign. Maybe Eddie, but not the rest of us.
Yeah, I've definitely had conflict with Justin over the last few weeks.
But,
No,
but
but
it's happening,
go ahead.
right? It's happening, and it's because, and a part of it is we didn't negotiate with each other in that teaming of how we were going to work together. So there's a lot of hurt feelings right now, I can tell you, across teams. And as Christians, right, we engage in the culture of nice. So we don't do really well.
Bless his heart, which is code for that guy's an idiot. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So
Yeah.
it's that time right now to start having those constructive conversations. And as Eric said, the way to launch a constructive conversation is to be vulnerable.
Hey, so if we could just park here for 1 second, Margaret, is I think, at least from my vantage point, I'm watching a lot of leaders who are walking with a limp right now, but their face is saying everything's fine, I'm fine, but their vocation has a limp, their family life has a limp right now, and like we're not negotiating, not just with our teams professionally, but with our teams at home. Justin, you were speaking about this just a few days ago, is our home lives, I don't want to say are a mess, but they're certainly more complicated than they were before the pandemic hit. And even just personally in my own life, I've had to kind of walk back, go back, repent, negotiate with my wife on like, I didn't realize, since we homeschool our kids, that I've completely thrown off her routine. I've completely just thrown an atomic bomb, and like
it does better without you, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean that's probably very true. But just like my presence, like, my kids associate dad as fun. So listen, the fun guy's home, and we want to be in the pool all day, or we want to just go out and have fun. And like I'm trying to work from home, and like my kids don't get that. My wife is frustrated. Then I take that into a team meeting. Then I take that into my work. Like we're carrying all of these complexities, and we need to negotiate these conversations, these feelings, kind of articulate some of this, and we struggle with this. I struggle with this.
I love what Margaret was saying about the negotiation. I think that in a trusted way, when Eric was talking about that, that's what we need to do oftentimes within our church staffs, or even for our volunteers, to be able to have that conversation of, hey, how is home going for you right now? And how are you managing that? And how can we reorganize our time, either in staff, of maybe we have to renegotiate days off. Maybe we need to renegotiate working hours and when, and maybe providing a little flex in there, because without that, the rubber band will snap. Margaret, what you said was right on. And specifically in a smaller church, I think that that's true with volunteers as well as paid staff, that volunteers are in the same spot, that they need also people to be able to say, hey, you know what, why don't you take off this Sunday or that Sunday?
Yeah.
That's really good. Let me underline something Margaret said, and I think this is true both for the church and in the home. When I was in graduate school taking a class on marriage therapy, one thing that the professor really stressed is that when we're working with a couple, we're not just working with each person individually, we're working with this third entity, right? That when two people get together, they create this third thing. And he said, our focus in our counseling needs to be that third thing. Okay, this is what Margaret is saying with the team, and that sixth member is actually bigger than any of the individual members. Eddie, that's true in our homes as well. Okay, we really need to be focusing on the family system itself and not simply the individuals. And I don't, the one thing I keep talking to, either if it's church leaders or business leaders, is how are you dealing with not having a stage? Okay. I think that's one of the hardest things. And I experienced this as a professor, right? One of the reasons we become professors is because we like people to pay attention to us, right? And I had multiple, preaching wasn't enough. I could only preach one day a week, right? But as a professor, I had to stage multiple days out of the week, right?
Yeah.
But, as church leaders, they really lost their stage. And I know a lot of churches are moving back into the building, but you don't have nearly as many people in the pews, right? You're having to spend a lot more time with people in your home who aren't nearly as impressed with you, right? As
Yeah.
maybe the average church member is. And that's a struggle.
No, I think that's so true right now. And Eric, can you just speak to the importance of a rooted identity
Yeah,
in this season? Because that's just something that I mean I've had to orient myself back to. Like I'm a beloved son of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and yes, like my calling hasn't shifted, but the means, the everything else around that has completely shifted. So I think we've all gone through an identity crisis in terms of vocation, but the rootedness of our true identity in the gospel is something at least I just feel the Lord has just hounded me on in this season.
that's right. That's right. And I'll speak to that. I want to go back to something Justin said. I've been amazed at how many church leaders don't care for the other people on their team holistically, right? Right. You really need to be asking, how are you doing? How is your family doing? And I think as we begin to ask some of those more holistic questions, we're reminded, right, that we're not just leaders, right? That we're human beings, right? And in a shift that I had to make, it was probably about 10 or 12 years ago, was stop seeing my quiet time as basically another study time, right? An opportunity to simply study the Bible, to learn more, so I could use it for teaching later on, right? But my quiet time, whether it's the meditation on scripture, prayer time, whatever it is, it really is a constantly rooting myself, in the gospel of Jesus Christ.
That's a good word.
But Eric, I want to follow up on Eric
Please.
because it's so important for lead pastors to be checking in with their team. But this goes back to the quadrilateral, I think, that Eric was talking about, is you have to be checking in with people at this time in yourself as vulnerable. You don't want to be creating that power differentiation. You got to be down in the trenches
That's
with
exactly right.
folks.
That's exactly
So
right.
so
That's
it's not just checking in, but it's a conversation and a dialogue. Here's how I'm doing.
That's
How
exactly
are
right.
you doing? If you're just coming on high, like, hey, I got it all together and I just want to be able to pour into you. This is the thing about teaming. It's about pouring into each other. Eric, if you want to say anything.
No.
Yeah.
Thank yeah. Thank you for saying that, Margaret. I mean, can we throw up that quadrilateral again? I think that's so important. The senior leaders, we need to model that vulnerability, and appropriately so, right? But one thing that I think we deny often is the power differentials that exist on our team. Okay, and if we deny those power differentials, then we don't recognize why we do have people on our team who are withdrawing, right, during this really stressful season. But I love what Margaret said. I think that's true. Our senior leadership needs to not just check in with others, but they also need to share appropriately the struggles that they're going through during this season.
Well, I mean, I I remember in grad school working on my counseling degree, and I had a professor share something that I'll never forget towards this end, and I've used this in my pastoral world so much, is you can only take someone as far as you're willing to go yourself. So as much as I looked at my own stuff is really the extent that I'm going to be comfortable taking someone else through that. And what I've seen working with a lot of pastors and leaders now in terms of soul care is we love to ask the question, how's your family? How's your soul? What's going on? And we try, but like, because we're not in touch with that and we've not really kind of checked in with how we're feeling, our team senses you're just asking me to ask that because you think it's the right thing to do, or that's what you should be doing. But we model that health for our team, and our team can sense, yeah, I'm not really going to answer that honestly because I know you're asking, and thank you for that, but like, I know that you're a mess and I know that you're struggling, but like, you won't share that, so why would I really tell you how I really
That's
feel
right.
about my family life?
That's
And I
right.
think that I would echo that too. I think that sometimes there's this, we have that Messiah complex, we deal with that and we work through that. But there's also a very pragmatic issue about this, is that fatigued leaders make really poor choices and they make really bad leaders at that time. And so sometimes we think, well, why is our staff is not doing this or taking advantage? There are a lot of people who are taking opportunities and advantage of this unique time of where we feel like that, like this could be the greatest opportunity in our lifetime of sharing the gospel and the hope that's there. But if we're in a fatigued state, or if people are in an overwhelmed state, there's no amount of thinking or creating
That's
or
really good.
what they can do to even kind of live out the gospel or share faith with their neighbors or create, watch parties or create new digital strategies or whatever it would be, we're stuck there in that space.
That's good, Justin. Just to play in that, I heard you once say recently at something that you were speaking at that we as senior leaders, as ministry leaders, are now the chief hope officers. Like we've pivoted into this role. But what does that look like? How would you have answered that, when the pandemic first started, and now as you've talked to leaders across the world, how would you answer that now with a 6-month look back? Like what does being that chief hope officer look like right now?
Yeah, I can't be a fake, and Eric could speak to that, Margaret could speak to that. I think that people in the pew, or I don't know if anybody still has pews, sorry. People that are in the chairs or people that are in the auditorium seats or people that are watching on screen, like you can smell insincerity. You can smell, dude, you're struggling, you're struggling just as much as I am. You don't have a clue, but there's this resiliency of hope that I think comes back to who we are in Christ Jesus. Who is our rock steady point of where I don't have the answer. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know what hybrid school is going to look like tomorrow, but let me tell you what I do know. I do know that there is a Lord that's there. I do know that he's willing to walk with us. I do know this. And when we lead out of that state of hope, that then people can look to us to say, okay, I don't have it all together, but I can take a step. I love it when Jesus spoke so often of where he would tell people all the time in the New Testament, you're not far off. You're not far away. You're really close. And I think that's even what hope brings for us and leadership in this time period. And whether you're on a screen or you're face to face or you're 6 feet away or you're behind a mask, people can smell it and see it. You can see it in your eyes. I mean, I don't know if you guys see that. Like the mask has only accentuated what our eyes have already been telling us all this time. And where hope comes from. And when you look at, you can see it with kids, with bright eyes of kids. You can see that with leaders too. So that's what, first thing everybody needs to do is go home and take a nap. Go take a nap and be okay with it. Read a book, read a stupid book, read a book that has nothing to do with leadership or anything else. Read a dumb book and then go on Netflix and watch something that really has no value other than to just let yourself breathe. And then talk to the Father and say, Lord, hey, I'm going to get up tomorrow and will you help me? It's
good.
Those things, yeah.
One of the things that jumps to mind as you were sharing that is I think one of the things that's really been true of me in this season as I've really kind of checked in with how I'm doing is the truth of the scriptures where it says God's mercies are new every morning.
Right on.
And I kind of like when I get out of bed and I kind of put my 2 feet down on the floor, I actually kind of just take a second to check in with that. Like, all right, God, like I'm out of bed. Thank you for this new day. And like, I just want to tangibly receive and feel that like, I'm going to need grace for this day. Because what I have no idea the territory that I'm in, but I know that you're with me and I know that your grace is there. And I want to bring that into the way I lead my team, the way that we lead our teams is like we can be gracious with one another, rooted in trust, as Eric that you were talking about. Now we can go take the hill or the mountain that's in front of us. But I think outside of that, it's just going to be suspicion. It's going to be a lot of performance driven, shame based, like get out, figure this out. When really, guys, like we're in this as a unit. Margaret, to your point, like the team is the collection of these individuals.
Yes.
I would love, yeah. Could you speak just a little bit more to that, into like the team dynamic when it's rooted in trust, when it's rooted in a sense of graciousness?
Right. By the way, Justin, as you were talking and Eddie talking, I was thinking about the chief hope officer versus cheap hope. Right?
Margaret, get her pulpit. Come on, Margaret.
Wow.
Let's go.
Come on.
Right?
Everyone just egalitarian now. Let's go.
I am not a minister of the word and sacrament. Okay, so, but that's what we're seeing in some cases offered, like cheap hope.
Right
It's
on.
a cheap hope that is not based in vulnerability. I am been reading Lamentations, and Lamentations chapter 3. It is just stark, and then after about 20 verses, it pivots to God's goodness. So you're just reading through desolation and then you get the hope. And I just think as the chief hope officer, it's that being realistic about what are the desolations, and then saying it, yes, and God is still sovereign with that. That is real hope, instead of making stuff up as if none of this has happened.
Yeah,
Right?
it's good.
Or that it's all going to go back to the way it was.
Right.
Like
it's not.
yeah, like everybody's just like, if we could just come back and meet together and stuff, and you're thinking, whoa, no, that ship has sailed. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also, just to put another plug in Lamentations, this is what Jeremiah is telling the Israelites. In order to go home, you have to go home by a different route. It's going to be different. It's a different road. God is there. God is on his throne, the impassibility of God, but you can't go back the same way.
That's so good.
So when we think about teaming, what do we know, Justin? We know that God is on his throne. We know that and that is central. For me, that the image of lifeline, that is the lifeline that we are holding on to. What else do I know? I know what God is calling my church as a mission, of what it is at the core of our mission. And as we've talked about in the past, what happens is we have a core of the mission, and then we add on, and then we add on, and then we add on. We create our own little midrash for our mission. But we know that core. So we know the core, and you know the hearts of the people who are on your team. So there are things that we know, even as we wind up shifting sports, etc. And then what I want to say is, what then, if we know those, are we investing in them? Are we investing in what we know? And one of the things I want to come back to this, but I'm just wondering, Justin and Eddie, how much of what's happening in your circles are occurring as a response to someone saying something, or external pressures? How
reactionary.
is that reactionary coming in? Because we've had some messages come through, like, what's the dumbest thing you've said? Are churches then reacting to external forces or voices or whatever, and moving away from that core of what we know? Because I think as a chief hope officer, what leaders need to be able to say to their flock is, not now, not yet, sort of things.
No, that's certainly powerful.
I would add to it too, my three favorite words in all of ministry are, let's try this. We're going to try this. It's not a, hey, this is going to happen for the next 20 years. And I love the teaming. What you talked about is, like, it's getting the people in the room, and the sovereignty of God is he's known that we're headed this direction, and he's brought this team of people together. Okay, let's get together and let's try something and give ourselves that, hey, we don't know what the future holds. I love, we don't know what the road, the bends have for us up around the corner, but we're going to try this and we'll see what happens. I don't know if it was a Dave Ramseyism or whoever, it's like, we've got to reserve the right to get smarter as we go along and make some changes and say, hey, this is based upon the information we had. I didn't know that the school district was going to shut down and our church plant was not going to be able to meet in the school. And so we're going to do this. And here's what we're going to be thinking about and doing. Eddie, the other thing I just noticed is that Eric and Margaret have books behind them and you and I don't. So I've identified the two smartest people in this webinar, okay? Always look for books. You and I, we don't read much books.
No. If it has a lot of pictures, that's why I'm really excited about Jimmy Dodd's new book, which is going to be a children's book with lots of pictures. So I'll be sure to read that one.
Shout out to Jimmy Dodd.
That's it. He will be back with us next week. But Justin, I would love to ask.
He's playing tiddlywinks right now with his daughter, probably.
That's probably true. One of one of the things that I've heard, and friends, if you're listening in on this and you've got a question, or maybe you would like to ask a follow-up to anything that you've heard so far, and I'd still love to hear, what is this the dumbest piece of advice someone in your congregation or someone on a webinar has told you? Please put that in the chat box or in the comment section. But please also field your questions. We very much want to make this a dialogue with you. But Justin, one of the things that I've heard a lot of churches say is this is a time for the accelerator. Like, we're going to hit the gas, right? Like, this is the greatest opportunity that the church has ever had. And listen, I actually fully agree with that. Like, I think one of the greatest opportunities in the history of the evangelical church in America is upon us. And yes, there very much is a time for the accelerator, and now could be that time. But there is also a time for the brake. And I think we need to press the brake and ask, what got us to this point? A lot of the things that I was doing, that we were doing before the pandemic, I don't want to start again. This has revealed a lot of just unhealthy team practices. This has been revealed a lot of just unhealthy personal practices in terms of just go, go, go. I actually think we need to hit the brake personally and maybe the accelerator organizationally. But I would love to hear from the three of you. How do you balance that tension? And like, do you agree? Do you disagree? I just please talk to me.
Eric, lead us off, man. The counselor
Yeah.
should lead off on this one. This seems like he's the man on this one.
Hey, well, I'll start us out. This is why I wish Jimmy was here, right? I think Jimmy would be able to help us here. But I think one of the hardest things in terms of maturity, one of the greatest signs of maturity, is really being able to keep counsel with God, right? Eddie, when you said that, I was a senior pastor for 11 years, and I was just worn down. I think I burned out once every 3 years. I think I've calculated that. It was once every 3 years. And that usually mirrored when there was some new church program, right, that somebody was sponsoring across the country. All right. And I had all these voices saying what you need to be doing. Right. And I didn't have the maturity to simply keep counsel with God.
Oh, it's really good.
Cool.
Margaret.
So I think what we think about this hitting the gas, and I just think, well, you have hit the gas. You've been hitting the gas for 6 months. I mean, that's what Justin's talking about, being burnt out. So how much more do you want to pour the accelerator on that? I'm mixing metaphors badly at this point, but I think there is wisdom. Eric, of course, I always think what Eric is saying is wise, is why is it that you want to do something different? That is the reflective aspect of working with your team. Why would this be the time to do something different? So that I talk about innovation a lot. It's deadly to do innovation when it's not linked directly to the mission. So it could be that this is the time to step back from doing things and taking other things on, but you can't do it just because the time is right, or that everything's up in the air. So since everything's up in the air, let's take on something new. But there's a tension in that, right? Justin just talked about, well, let's try something. And Justin, I love that. And I love the idea of saying is like, well, it's a good idea. It's not necessarily right or wrong. It's good. And as I get more information, as we get more information or try something, it either gets better or we step away. And no gain, no foul. It's fine. And when people see for pastors the idea that everything they do is either right or wrong, then you have this pressure to not be able to pivot. But when we've talked about this before on the webinars, if you're coming from a place of let's try it, let's learn, let's experiment, and as we learn more, we're going to make adjustments, then that's the way we want to think about things. That's a healthy way for the church body. The church body is an organism, right?
Yeah. in a very pragmatic way, I think that that's what we're learning within a digital framework of church. Like, you know, there's nobody that's got this figured out. Like, we're working with a couple of hundred churches right now and helping them think through it, but it's all an experiment. It's all an experiment in thinking through that. I think the critical leadership question is, what are we going to stop doing? Maybe we should have like a fall series on, you know, how to stop some stuff so that you can stay alive and not kill yourself, you know, or kill your wife, or your wife kill you, or your children revolt. It's like, what is it that we need to be able to stop? And this is a great time. This is an awesome time to stop doing some stuff, because we can blame it on pandemic. Sorry, we couldn't do that anymore because, you know, the pandemic.
So true.
Pandemic. Yeah. Like, I would blame the pandemic for everything that we don't want to keep doing. But I think there's a great list to negotiate with our staff, with our church, with our programming, with our family even. Hey, you know what, man, a whole lot of families have renegotiated kids' sports. A whole lot of families are renegotiating TV. A whole lot of families are renegotiating how they think about school. I think about all these ways of doing that.
Yeah. Margaret, Eric, I'd love to hear from you. If we could just take this, and Justin, I'll give you a minute to think about it too. Of what are some things that you've heard organizationally in church and ministry world and pastorally that leaders are having to rethink? What are some things that they're actually rethinking about their teams? What are some of the things that they're rethinking about their church life and ministry life and home life? You just gave some great examples, Justin, but like any themes jump to mind?
Yeah, I can just start out. I think with the scare of COVID, you know, and many church leaders, they've had family members who are sick, and several of them have had family members die. Just the preciousness of those relationships, I think, has come back into focus, right? And I think it'd be good. I don't want to downplay just the tragedy of COVID and everything that's happened. But I'm also hearing church leaders talk about how this time of slowing down has been good for them and good for their families, you know, in certain ways. It's actually caused them. I actually had a phone call with a pastor friend of mine just 2 Sundays ago. And he said, you know, he and his wife they have worked through issues that they needed to work through for the past 15 years, right? But this sheltering in place has really forced them to reprioritize their marriage, right? I mean, if they were going to stay together, they had to prioritize it, right? And so that's been actually one of the positive things, changes that has come out during this time.
Yeah.
Well, Eddie, I like to say, and Justin, and you, like, your opinion, that whenever I go to a wedding or a funeral, whatever the family dynamic, it's like a balloon. Like, if a family is happy and well adjusted, a wedding brings that out. It's beautiful. If there's dysfunction in the family, the wedding brings that out, right? Same thing with a funeral. When we come to celebrate someone's life, the family is healthy, come around, and it's a celebration. If it's not healthy, then everyone wants to know what's in the will, right? So in a sense, I think what has happened in these 6 months is the COVID has been the balloon.
Yeah.
So if a team is healthy, if it started out healthy, then it's functioning and there's deeper meaning and purpose in what's happening. If a team is not healthy, that balloon is being blown up and you're getting into the dark corners of where we're not healthy. And so I want lead pastors and their teams to think about that as what's been blown up, what's the balloon, what are we experiencing,
what's been exposed.
Yeah, what has been exposed in good and bad in these 6 months, because this is the gift, kind of what Eric, what you were talking about. It's been a gift in this exposure of what is it that I need to be pouring into to get to that foundation of a healthy team, and what can I celebrate of what's working well, and how have we come together to work well together.
You know, I think that exact frame applies to, as we look into like inward to ourselves, to our family lives, to our home dynamics. Like the last 6 months has exposed where were the cracks, and now they're probably gaping holes, or like what's really the cohesive stuff that was working that's been strengthened. That's really good. That really resonates. Friends, I know we have about 15 minutes left, and if we could, if I could just take the personal point of privilege here to go back and revisit something that you said, Margaret, and that's cheap grace. I think that has really been a theme that I've heard a lot. Just these cheap isms that we've thrown around and over spiritualized. And Eric, I would love for you just to put on a counseling hat and like just the personal, like spiritually disillusioning effects that cheap hope, cheap grace brings when we just throw that around to our team. At least like personally, it just chips away at our team's soul when we just bring these cheap isms, these Hallmark card kind of deals into when our teams are struggling, into when we're struggling. Can you just speak to the effects of that on our souls, on our lives?
Yeah, most definitely. I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was on one of our webinars with Mandy, and I believe she was talking about Psalm 88, right? And how we have these Psalms of lament, right? And I think Psalm 88 is one of the Psalms that doesn't resolve, toward the end. But I'm glad you asked that, Eddie, because, Margaret was talking about Lamentations. And what I noticed is before she began talking about Lamentations, the verse that you quoted, your mercies are new every morning, it's smack dab in the middle of Lamentations.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Smack dab in the middle of it. And actually on Wednesday nights, just last night, I supervised counseling students, right? Beginning counseling students. And when you have a beginning counseling student, right, they want people to get better, and they want them to get better quickly, to validate the fact that I'm in the right field. All right. So what we always have to do in their practicum, right? That's prior to their internship. I have to tell them you need to track with your client. When your client is talking about their pain, you need to stay there with them. Okay. When I was at Wheaton, what I should tell students, we need to be willing to stay in the grave, with someone for a few days, but before we try to get up to the resurrection, we need to track with them. Right. And we see that in scripture. That's one of the reasons I love what Justin said. This chief hope, it's actually a hope in the resiliency we have because of God. Right. Yeah. And I think Jeremiah actually gives us a beautiful vision. Jeremiah tracks with his own pain. Right. And so he's able to track with the pain of his people. And it's just like what I tell my counseling students, if we can't stay there with them, we can't stay there in the grave with them for a few days, they're not going to come up out of the grave with us.
Yeah, it's good. Justin, how do you interact with that? Margaret, how do you interact with that?
Do any of you have your Bible within hand's reach? Mine is across the desk. Justin, you have it? You have your phone at least. Justin, would you, as we talk, but would you mind getting the last 2 verses of Lamentations, chapter 6, the last 2 verses? It's a pretty interesting way that the book ends, similar to what Eric is saying.
Justin is the only righteous one amongst.
I was gonna say it.
Mine
pretty low bar.
Three hands away.
Last 2 verses, Lamentations chapter 5.
It's the last 2 chapters of the book. Yeah. Okay. I said the last 2 verses.
Yeah, please read the whole 2 chapters of the book right now, live on
Webinar just got a little longer, folks.
Yeah.
Need to get DoorDash, send you some food. Verse 21 of Lamentations chapter 5, reading now the NIV. Restore us to yourself, Lord, that we may return. Renew our days as of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure.
So you all are the pastors, but I read that it doesn't end triumphantly. It ends with that likelihood that desolation could be there. It's not triumphal. And I think as whatever is going to be happening in the next year, the new normal has to have this sense of we've been through something deep. We've gone through suffering, and that suffering has to be embedded in our new identity. To be more resilient, we have to also suffer and pull that in. And I think that's the paradox of resiliency, is that resiliency always has an aspect of pain to it.
Yeah, it's rooted in brokenness. Resiliency is rooted in brokenness, and
Right.
it finds strength in brokenness. Yeah, that's good.
We talk about this with church planners, and I have a great friend talks about this all the time, Lee Stevenson with the Converge Network. He talks about that in any new church, there will always be a crisis of finances, a crisis of leadership, and a crisis of relationship. And sometimes those are the things that build resiliency to develop the kind of the fabric of what a church clings to where it makes it willing to take on whatever things might happen in its days ahead. Or we think about, people talk about now with school and online and what kids are not learning. I think some of the people are asking the great questions of, what are they learning? And some of this is their own initiative, their own ingenuity, their own resiliency to handle difficult chapters of life and things. And some people point back to kind of the days of World War II, and they talked about that so many kids missed years of schooling, but yet what were they learning in that? They learned resiliency, the ability to innovate, the ability to be able to deal with conflict no matter what would happen around them. I think God is growing in us some muscles right now. It's like Lord's doing some good work in our churches and in us. And good work is hard work, always. Like, I don't know if anybody had a dad like mine, but man, the harder the work, the gooder he thought it was, and I know that's not correct, but that's the stuff that builds in us. And I think it's that pruning, it's that shearing that's there. And man, Lord's good. He's up to something good. Aslan's on the move, man. Aslan is on the move in our own lives and in our churches.
Yeah. And he's on the move despite whether or not we were going back into buildings, despite that we couldn't gather corporately. And I think we just lost sight of that because we've been so focused on Sunday morning and producing Sunday morning and getting up and, being that guy, Eric, to your point, that I've got the platform, I've got the stage, I've got the Twitter followers, I've got the following, and we're validating ourselves Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. And I think in this season, at least for me, the Lord's going, it's actually not about any of that. It's about the fact that I'm working in your life and the lives of your friends, your neighbors, and your coworkers. And what would it look like, to quote Hebrews 12, to have everything shaken so that the things that remain are the unshakable things.
And the reality was, like, your physical presence at a place didn't give your heart to that place. Like, it didn't prove that you were spiritually growing or that you were mature or that you were resilient. Your physical presence did that. Now that we've taken away that physical presence, it's kind of opened up the realities and pulled back the curtain on all of us in our church, and me included. It's like, okay,
totally.
Sometimes we're mailing it in some spots and other places. This is just pulling it back and be like, all right, hey, this is what we got to work with. All right, here we go. Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So in our last just few minutes together here, I would love to hear just a final thought as you look back 6 months, post-pandemic, I'm sorry, not post-pandemic, we're still in the middle of the pandemic, but 6 months into the pandemic. What have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about the way that you lead your teams? And what's just one kind of final nugget of truth that you would leave with our audience here? And Justin, since you're our featured guest, I'm going to start with you. So what have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about managing your team? And what's just one kind of final nugget?
No, that wasn't on the script, homie. That's a deep question.
I know.
I only deal with the shallow questions.
That's why you don't have any books.
I don't have the books behind me. I got people walking behind me.
No, come on. Just what jumped into your head? Don't overthink it. What popped into your head?
What am I learning? I'm learning that my wife is better than I ever thought. And I sometimes have been so consumed with some stuff of where I've missed out on that at different times. I've learned that all my Reformed friends are going to laugh. I'm learning that, again, that Jesus is enough, man. That Jesus is enough, that he's good enough in the midst of this. I'm learning that good friends are good friends, whether you see them or not, I'm learning organizationally that people are the product in some regards. Like we think that it's really about the people, and the health of people produce the fruits and the results and the things that are there.
That's really good. Thanks for sharing that. Eric, what about you?
Yeah. There's that old song, "Stop the Love You Save May Be Your Own." I've never really known what that means.
Margaret,
get it, Margaret, get it.
That kind of show. I had no idea it was that kind of show. This is getting out of hand. Sorry.
We have a good time here.
13 on this thing already.
Right? That for some reason that chorus has come back to me over and over in the past 6 months. And God, I am an introvert, right? I mean, I'm one of the few people who, when the shelter in place happened, I felt better not having to go out a lot. Okay. And I honestly, I say this, I had a few clients who I noticed about 6 months in, they were doing a lot better, but nobody wanted to talk about it because everyone else's life is falling apart. Okay. That being said, the relationships that I built with my family and friends and the church itself, that has saved me, really during this time. I've researched and I've written about the importance of relationships, but in the past 6 months, I've lived just how important they are.
Yeah, that's good. Margaret, last but not least, and feel free to dance. So even though my mom said that I shouldn't hang out with girls who drink, dance, or chew, but I'm gonna make an exception.
I thought it was cuss. What kind of church did you grow up in, Eddie? Come on.
Oh wow. So before I answer, I just want to say we have lots of resources on the show page, including I put together some questions for constructive conversations and a team assessment that comes out of Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, that's going to be there. Here's what I want to say is that in the humanities, we talk about liminal space. And I just think that's a fancy pants word, but let me explain what liminal space is. Liminal space.
I don't have books behind me. I have no idea what that means.
But the idea is what we're experiencing is that there's a break from the past. The past was like March 16th. It's gone, right? The future, we just don't know what it is. So we're in this liminal space that has no past, and we don't know what the present is. And so rather than mourn that is to see it as a gift of living in the present. Think of this as we were on a road and the past got chopped off and the present got chopped off, and we're now on this island. What is enough to live in the present? And that goes back to what Justin said. Jesus is enough. Mm-hmm. God is enough. And to let go of the past and the present, and to keep our identity in the future. And that's what's been a gift to me, is not to worry about the future. I just don't know what it's going to be. But that has made my present more expansive.
That's good. That's good. Well, friends, thanks for joining us. We could obviously spend a lot more time talking about this topic, but friends, if you've tuned in with us, just want to say thank you. We hope that this has just brought some refreshment to your day, to your soul. Obviously, we like to laugh a lot as we talk about some heavy topics, but we trust that this whole project at the Backstage at resilientchurchleadership.com would just be a place where your soul can find a little bit of water, some refreshment during this time. We have a lot on our plates. We have a lot of voices whispering in our ears of things to do, pieces to read, leading this team, leading that team. But at the end of the day, it's healthy leaders that lead healthy churches, and it's healthy churches that are going to change the fabric of their region. So that's kind of our value proposition to you as you continue to tune in here, is that we want to see you be a healthy and whole leader, and just find a little bit of respite for your soul as you find a safe third space with us here. Thank you for tuning in with us, friends. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making time for this. We'll see you next week, 2 p.m. Eastern time, as we continue this conversation on soul care and resiliency. We'll see you then.